He always had the world at his feet, but he never knew what it meant to truly feel. She, despite the darkness, saw life more clearly than anyone else. Two very different paths crossed in the rain, changing both their destinies forever. When love shows up in the most unexpected places, resisting becomes impossible. Before diving into this emotional journey, don't forget to like and share this inspiring story. Rain fell over the city, making the normally crowded streets almost deserted. Only luxury cars passed swiftly, splashing water along the way. In one of these vehicles, Alexander Morgan observed the city emotionlessly through the darkened windows of his bulletproof Mercedes. At 38, he had built a business empire that had made him one of the most powerful men in the country. He had everything money could buy, but had never felt anything. At least, that's what he thought until that day. The driver braked suddenly, causing Alexander to look up from the documents he was analyzing. "Sorry, sir," the driver said hesitantly. "There's a young woman in the middle of the road." Irritated by the interruption, Alexander raised his eyes and saw her. A young woman with fiery red hair, wearing simple clothes soaked by the rain, holding a bouquet of flowers. There was something fragile about her, but also an inexplicable strength in her posture. That's when he realized she was blind. The young woman stumbled and her flowers scattered across the wet asphalt. People hurried past, some avoiding her, others stepping on the fallen flowers, all ignoring her existence. Without understanding his own impulse, Alexander opened the car door, ignoring his driver's protests about his Italian suit. "Let me help you," he said, bending down to collect the flowers. The water soaked his handmade shoes, but for the first time in years that didn't matter. "Who's there?" Her voice was soft but alert. Her eyes, a deep green, stared into emptiness with a cautious expression. "Someone who's just helping," he replied, surprising himself with his gentle tone. "I don't need help," she responded firmly. "I can do this by myself." Alexander was paralyzed. No one in his entire adult life had refused his help. People practically threw themselves at his feet for a crumb of his attention. This refusal intrigued him deeply. "Even so, allow me," he insisted, collecting the last flowers. When he handed them over, their fingers briefly touched. It was brief contact, but enough to send an electric current throughout his body. "I'm Sarah," she said, after a moment of silence, "and you have gentle hands for someone who seems so powerful. How did you—" "Your perfume is too expensive for this street," she smiled, "and your hands are too soft for someone who works around here." Alexander felt something different. In his chest, a sensation he couldn't name. "Where are you going? I can take you." "No, thank you," Sarah replied, adjusting the bouquet in her arms. "My flower shop is nearby. I know every stone on this sidewalk." "Flower shop?" "Yes, Garden of Dreams. A somewhat poetic name for such a small shop, isn't it?" She laughed, and the sound of her laughter made something tremble inside him. At least let me accompany you there," insisted Alexander, ignoring the messages that made his cell phone vibrate incessantly in his pocket. "If it makes you feel better," Sarah conceded with an enigmatic smile. During the short journey, Alexander discovered that Sarah had lost her sight in an accident 5 years ago. She had learned to recognize each flower by touch and scent, transforming her limitation into a unique gift. Her life was simple, completely different from his, and yet there was a richness there that all his money could never buy. Arriving at the small shop, Sarah stopped at the door. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Alexander," he replied, surprising himself by not using his surname as he usually did in introductions. "Well, Alexander, you saved my flowers today. Stop by any day to choose an arrangement. First purchase on the house." Before he could respond, she had already entered the store, leaving him alone on the wet sidewalk. Alexander stood there, watching through the window as she arranged the flowers with hypnotizing delicacy. His driver appeared with the car, reminding him of the important meeting that awaited him. On the way to the office, for the first time in years, Alexander couldn't concentrate on the numbers on his screen. His mind constantly returned to that encounter in the rain, to the sensation of her fingers touching his. to the smile that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. That night, in his luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, Alexander realized that something had changed. The silence that once brought him peace now seemed empty. The apartment decorated with expensive artwork seemed cold and lifeless. Something was missing. It lacked color, it lacked life, it lacked flowers. Lying in his king-size bed, with Egyptian cotton sheets, he found himself planning a visit to the small flower shop the next day. He couldn't explain why, but for the first time in a long time, he was eager for dawn. Perhaps, just perhaps, that encounter in the rain was the beginning of something that all his money couldn't buy, a chance to truly feel. And so, on that rainy night, fate had drawn its plan. A plan that would forever transform the life of a man who had everything, except what really mattered, and a woman who, even without being able to see the world, saw the true essence of people. The next morning, Alexander woke up earlier than usual. His morning ritual, always so meticulously timed, seemed different. As he adjusted his Italian tie in front of the mirror, he realized he was anxious, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. He cancelled all his morning meetings, something unthinkable in his rigorously planned routine. The Garden of Dreams opened at 8 a.m., as he had discreetly verified in a quick search the night before. At 8:15, his car was parking on the modest street where the small flower shop was located. The shop, which in the previous day's rain had seemed just another common establishment, revealed itself differently under the morning light. The facade, though simple, had its own charm. Flowers of all colors overflowed in artisanal vases, and a vine framed the entrance with delicate purple flowers. The doorbell chimed when he entered, announcing his presence. "Good morning," Sarah's voice sounded from the back of the shop. "I smell Armani. Could that be you, Alexander?" He stopped, surprised. "How did you know?" "Besides the cologne, your steps are firm, but hesitant, like someone who's not used to simple environments like this." She smiled, arranging a bouquet of lilies. "What brings you here so early?" For the first time in years, Alexander found himself speechless. What would he say? That he couldn't sleep thinking about her? That something inexplicable had drawn him here? "I need flowers for my office." "Ah, of course." Sarah seemed slightly disappointed. "What kind of environment is it?" "Minimalist, shades of grey and white." "Typical," she murmured, moving with surprising dexterity among the pots. "But let's bring some life to that monochromatic world of yours. What do you think of orchids?" "Actually, I trust your choice." Sarah paused, turning in his direction. "A powerful man who trusts the judgment of a blind florist. That's new." "You intrigue me," admitted Alexander, moving closer. "How do you identify each flower without seeing them?" "Come here." She extended her hand. Hesitantly, he took it. Sarah guided his fingers to a nearby flower. "Close your eyes." Alexander obeyed, feeling the softness of the petals under his fingers. "Feel the texture? The unique shape? This is a peony. Each flower has its own signature, its own story to tell. We just need to learn to listen with more than our eyes." Her touch on his hand, guiding him through the different flowers, awakened sensations he thought long dormant. Sarah explained each characteristic, each fragrance, with a passion that made it impossible not to get involved in her world. "How did you start in this business?" he asked, still with his eyes closed, absorbing each sensation. "After the accident, I had to relearn everything. The flowers saved me. Each one taught me that there are different ways of seeing the world." She released his hand, and Alexander immediately felt the absence of contact. At first, many doubted. A blind florist? It seemed like a bad joke. But I proved I could do this. Each customer who leaves here happy is a small victory. "And what? About the thorns, don't you get hurt?" Sarah laughed, a sound that made his heart race. "The thorns are part of the beauty. We can't truly appreciate something if we don't accept its challenges." Alexander watched as she began to assemble an arrangement, her hands moving with precision and grace. White orchids mingled with small blue flowers he didn't recognize, creating something both elegant and surprising. Forget-me-nots, she explained, noticing his interest. They perfectly complement the orchids, bringing a touch of color without being excessive. Your office will remain minimalist, but now it will have a story to tell. How much do I owe you? First purchase is on the house, remember? Sarah smiled, extending the arrangement. Consider it a thank you for yesterday. I can't accept. You can and you will, she insisted, but with one condition, which is, come back to tell me how the flowers transformed your environment. I want to know if I managed to bring some life to your world of grey. In that moment, Alexander realized it wasn't just the flowers bringing color to his life, it was her, with her gentle strength and her ability to see beauty even in darkness. I'll be back, he promised, and for the first time in years it was a promise he intended to keep with all his heart. Leaving the shop, carrying the delicate arrangement, Alexander knew that something fundamental had changed. The man who had entered there 15 minutes earlier was not the same one leaving now. Sarah had awakened something in him, something that neither his business achievements nor his fortune had managed to touch. In his office, later, while observing the flowers carefully positioned on his desk, he realized he was smiling. The soft aroma of the flowers filled the environment, transforming the previously sterile space into something more alive, more real. As Sarah had said, now there was a story to tell, and that story, he realized, was just beginning. During the following week, Alexander created a new routine. Every morning before heading to the office, he stopped at the Garden of Dreams. At first, he invented excuses. More flowers for the office, a gift for his secretary, arrangements for the meeting room. Sarah, with her enigmatic smile, pretended to believe his justifications. On one of these mornings, he found her organizing a new shipment of flowers. The morning sun entered through the window, making her red hair shine like polished copper. She hummed softly, completely absorbed in her work. "Good morning," he said, observing how she immediately recognized his presence. "Let me guess," Sarah smiled. "More flowers for your office that must already look like a greenhouse." "Actually," Alexander hesitated, "today I came just to talk." Sarah stopped what she was doing, surprised. The powerful businessman has time for conversations in a flower shop. "I have an hour before my first meeting," he replied, approaching the counter. "And I want to learn about flowers." Her face lit up. "Seriously? Most customers just want something pretty and quick." "I'm not most customers." "No, you definitely aren't," she agreed, extending her hand. "Come, I'll teach you something special today." Sarah guided him to the back of the shop, where a small, improvised greenhouse housed more delicate flowers. The space was tight, forcing them to stay close. Alexander could smell the soft perfume of her hair mixed with the aroma of the flowers. "This is where I take care of my favorites," she explained. "Flowers that need special attention, like gardenias." "How do you manage all this alone?" "I have help a few hours a week. Jenny, a botany student, comes in the morning to organize deliveries and help me with paperwork. But caring for the flowers, that's all mine." As she spoke, her hands danced over the plants with an intimacy that fascinated Alexander. Each touch was precise, each movement had a purpose. "How did you learn all this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her hands stopping over a gardenia. "After the accident, I spent months in depression. One day, my grandmother brought a pot of violets to my room. She said that even if I couldn't see them, I could feel them grow. At first I thought it was nonsense, but I started touching the flowers every day, feeling the subtle changes, learning their rhythms. That's how I discovered that there are other ways to see the world." Alexander observed a small wrinkle of concentration form between her eyebrows as she spoke. It was the first time she had mentioned the accident since their first meeting. "And your grandmother?" "She passed away 2 years ago," Sarah answered softly. "But she left this place to me. It was hers, you know. The Garden of Dreams has existed for over 40 years. "I'm sorry," he said genuinely. "Don't be. She lived a full life and taught me the most important lesson, that true beauty is in continuing to bloom, even when the world seems dark." In that moment, watching Sarah among her flowers, Alexander felt something change inside him. Here was a woman who had lost so much and still managed to see beauty in everything. while he, with all his empire, could barely find meaning in his days until meeting her. "Teach me," he asked, surprising them both. "I want to learn to see as you see." Sarah smiled, taking his hand again. "First lesson, close your eyes. Don't try to control everything. Just feel." For the next hour, Sarah guided him through the world of flowers, through touch and smell. She taught him to recognize different textures, to identify subtle fragrances, to understand the right moment, to water each species. "You have a natural gift," she commented, surprised when he correctly identified an orchid just by touch. "I have a good teacher," he replied, opening his eyes to find her smiling. Alexander's phone vibrated, reminding him of the outside world. It was time for his meeting. "I need to go," he said reluctantly. "Come back tomorrow," Sarah replied. "We still have a lot to explore." Leaving the shop, Alexander realized his hands still carried the perfume of the flowers. In his office, during the meeting with investors, he found himself thinking about Sarah's words about seeing beauty even in darkness. That night, instead of working late as usual, he spent hours researching flowers. He wanted to surprise her the next day, show that he was truly interested in her world. For the first time in years, he felt like a student eager to impress the teacher. What he didn't know yet was that that first lesson in the small greenhouse would be just the beginning of a much greater transformation in his life. A transformation that would teach him that sometimes you need to close your eyes to really begin to see. The weeks passed, and Alexander's visits to the Garden of Dreams became an indispensable part of his routine. Each morning brought a new lesson, not just about flowers, but about life. Sarah, with her heightened sensitivity, noticed the subtle changes in Alexander. His softer voice, his less rigid movements, the way he now breathed deeply the aroma of the flowers before touching them. On a particularly busy morning, Alexander entered the shop looking tense. Sarah, arranging a vase of lilies, immediately felt the change in his energy. "Tough day?" she asked, turning in his direction. "How did you—" he began, but then smiled. "I forgot that you see more than most." "Your steps," she explained. "They're heavier today. Tell me what happened." Alexander hesitated. Normally he didn't share his professional problems with anyone, but something about Sarah made him want to open up. "I'm about to close an important deal," he began, approaching the counter. "A merger I've been planning for months, but now at the last moment complications have arisen." Sarah listened attentively as Alexander explained the details. She didn't understand much about corporate mergers, but she could sense the concern in his voice. "You know," she said after he finished, "flowers also face challenges. Sometimes, a plant that seems strong suddenly begins to wilt. The secret is to understand the root of the problem." "And how do you do that?" asked Alexander, intrigued. "Come," Sarah called him, guiding him to a small area at the back of the shop. There, several plants in different stages of growth were arranged on shelves. "This is my plant hospital," she explained, smiling. "Here, I take care of those that are facing difficulties." She took a small pot with a plant that seemed to be dying. "Look at this one, or rather, touch it." Alexander touched the wilted leaves, feeling their rough texture. "At first glance, or touch, it seems to be dying, doesn't it?" asked Sarah. "But the problem isn't always in the leaves we see, often it's in the roots we can't see." She gently removed the plant from the pot, exposing the roots. "Feel this? The roots are compacted, they have no space to grow. This plant isn't dying, it's suffocating." Alexander was fascinated by the analogy. "And how do you solve this?" "First, we identify the real problem, then we give the plant what it needs, in this case, a larger pot and fresh soil. With care and patience, it will bloom again." As he watched Sarah carefully replant the small plant, Alexander felt something change within him. Perhaps the problem with the merger wasn't what he initially thought. Perhaps, like the plant, the business needed more space to grow. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of a new determination, "how you just gave me a brilliant idea." She smiled, cleaning her hands on her apron. "Happy to help. But remember, Alexander, sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Not everything needs to be complicated. In that moment, looking at Sarah with dirt on her hands and a smile on her face, Alexander felt a wave of affection that caught him by surprise. She was so different from all the people in his social circle, genuine, simple, deeply wise. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You have no idea how much you've helped me today." "My pleasure," Sarah replied, and for a moment it seemed she wanted to say something more. But then, turning back to her plants, she added, "Now go. You have a deal to save." Leaving the shop, Alexander felt reinvigorated. The lesson about roots made him rethink his entire strategy for the merger. Instead of forcing a union that could suffocate both companies, he decided to propose a more flexible partnership, giving both sides room to grow. In the days that followed, Alexander immersed himself in negotiations with a new perspective. His associates noticed the change. He was more patient, more open to different ideas, more focused on long-term solutions than immediate gains. A week later, the merger was successfully completed on terms that benefited all parties involved. It was a triumph not only financially, but personally for Alexander. That night, after all the contracts were signed and the celebrations ended, Alexander found himself driving back to the Garden of Dreams. The shop was already closed, but a soft light shone through the window. He knocked lightly on the glass. Moments later, Sarah appeared, surprised. "Alexander, what are you doing here so late?" I needed to thank you," he said. Only then, realizing he hadn't really planned what to say. "Your lesson about the roots, it changed everything." Sarah smiled, opening the door to let him in. The aroma of the flowers at night was different, more intense, almost magical. "I'm glad it helped," she said softly, "but I'm sure the credit is all yours." "No," insisted Alexander. "You made me see things differently, not just business, but everything." There was a moment of silence between them, full of something unsaid. Alexander realized he was closer to Sarah than normal, could feel the warmth of her presence. "Sarah, he began, but was interrupted by the sound of his cell phone. The moment broke. Sarah took a step back, and Alexander reluctantly answered the call. It was his assistant, with a last-minute emergency related to the merger. "I need to go," he said after hanging up, "but I'll be back tomorrow." "I'll be here," Sarah replied, with a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. Leaving the shop, Alexander felt that something fundamental had changed. Sarah's lessons weren't just about flowers or business. They were about life, about connection, about seeing beauty where others saw only challenges. And somewhere, deep in his heart, a seed of something deeper began to germinate. The weeks turned into months, and the relationship between Alexander and Sarah continued to deepen. The morning visits to the flower shop became the most anticipated moment of the day for Alexander. He discovered that the world seen through the eyes, or rather through the perceptions of Sarah, was infinitely richer and more colorful than he had ever imagined. On a particularly pleasant Saturday afternoon, Alexander arrived at the Garden of Dreams outside his usual schedule. Sarah was closing the shop when she heard the familiar steps approaching. "Alexander," she called, surprised, "what are you doing here at this hour?" He hesitated for a moment before answering, "Actually, I came to invite you." Sarah tilted her head, curious. "An invitation?" "Yes." Alexander took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'd like to take you to dinner. I mean, if you want, of course." A soft smile spread across Sarah's face. "Dinner? That's unexpected." "I know it may seem sudden," Alexander hurried to explain, "but we've known each other for months and, well, I'd like to spend more time with you, outside the shop." Sarah was silent for a few seconds, which to Alexander seemed like an eternity. Finally she answered, "I would love to, Alexander, but with one condition." "Which is?" he asked anxiously. "Let me choose the place," she smiled. "Trust me." Alexander, accustomed to always being in control, felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement with the proposal. "Okay, I trust you." An hour later, Alexander found himself being guided by Sarah through the neighborhood streets. She walked confidently, her arm lightly intertwined with his. To his surprise, they didn't go to any chic or exclusive restaurant, as he was accustomed to. Instead, Sarah led him to a small community park. The night air was filled with the scent of jasmine, and the soft sound of a nearby fountain created an almost magical atmosphere. "We're here," announced Sarah, stopping near a large oak tree. Alexander looked around, confused. "But there's no restaurant here." Sarah laughed softly. "Who said we need a restaurant to dine? Wait here." She walked away for a moment, returning with a basket that was hidden behind a bush. "Night picnic," she explained. "I thought it would be more special than any five-star restaurant." Alexander was speechless. In all his years of business dinners and sophisticated encounters, he had never experienced something so simple and at the same time so charming. They sat on a soft blanket, and Sarah began to take out a variety of homemade snacks, fresh fruits, and a bottle of wine from the basket. "How did you prepare all this?" asked Alexander, amazed. "I have my secrets," she smiled mysteriously, "and some very helpful friends." As the night progressed, Alexander found himself more relaxed than he had ever been. They talked about everything and nothing, laughed at old stories, and shared dreams for the future. Sarah spoke about her desire to expand the flower shop, perhaps create a program to teach floral arrangements to other people with visual impairments. Alexander, in turn, confessed his growing disenchantment with the corporate world and his desire to do something more meaningful with his life and resources. In a moment of comfortable silence, Alexander observed Sarah. The soft moonlight illuminated, her face highlighting the delicacy of her features. Without thinking, he extended his hand and lightly touched her face. Sarah remained still for an instant, then leaned into the touch. "What do you see, Alexander?" she asked softly. "I see." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I see beauty, strength. I see someone who taught me to see the world in a completely new way." Slowly, almost hesitantly, Alexander leaned forward. Sarah, sensing his approach, did the same. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, full of promise and contained emotion. When they separated, both were silent for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. "That was," began Alexander. "Unexpected?" completed Sarah with a smile. "Wonderful," he corrected. They spent the rest of the night talking in low voices, sharing more kisses and discovering a new dimension in their relationship. When it finally came time to leave, Alexander felt reluctant to leave that perfect moment. "Sarah," he said, holding her hands, "I want you to know that this, us, is important to me. You are important to me." She squeezed his hands gently. "You are important to me too, Alexander, more than I imagined anyone could be." As they walked back hand in hand, Alexander realized that something fundamental had changed. The corporate world, which once occupied all his thoughts, now seemed distant and less relevant. What really mattered was there, by his side, guiding him down a path he never knew existed. That night, lying in his bed, Alexander couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly happy, truly alive. And all thanks to a blind florist who had taught him to see the world with his heart. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Fate still had many surprises in store for Alexander and Sarah, some sweet, others challenging, but together they were ready to face anything the future held for them. The weeks following the picnic in the park were like a dream for Alexander and Sarah. Their relationship blossomed, filling their lives with a joy that neither had experienced before. Alexander began dividing his time between the office and the flower shop, often surprising Sarah with unexpected visits in the middle of the day. However, like every rose has its thorns, their idyll was about to face its first challenges. On a sunny Thursday afternoon, Alexander hurriedly entered the Garden of Dreams, his face tense and worried. "Sarah," he called, his voice betraying an unusual anxiety. Sarah, who was arranging a vase of tulips, immediately turned at the sound of his voice. "Alexander, what happened?" He approached, taking her hands in his. "I need to travel tonight." "Travel?" she repeated, surprised. "Where? For how long?" Alexander sighed heavily. "New York. One of our biggest investors is threatening to withdraw their support. I need to go personally to try to save the situation. I'll be gone for at least 2 weeks." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing the information. They had never been apart for so long since they started seeing each other. "I understand," she finally said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's your job. You need to go." Alexander felt a pang of guilt hearing the resignation in her voice. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I wanted to have more time to prepare us, but the situation is critical." "Don't worry about me," she replied, squeezing his hands lightly. "I'll be here when you return." He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her perfumed hair. "I'll miss you every minute." "Me too," she murmured against his chest. That night, Alexander left for New York with a heavy heart. In the days that followed, he found himself divided between endless business meetings and the constant longing for Sarah. They spoke every day by phone, but it wasn't the same. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Sarah faced her own challenges. Alexander's absence left a void in her routine, and she found herself constantly touching the small vase of orchids he had given her before leaving. A week after Alexander's departure, Sarah received an unexpected visit at the flower shop. The doorbell rang, announcing the entry of a customer. "Good afternoon," she greeted, turning toward the sound. "How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," replied a female voice, soft but firm. "You must be Sarah." Sarah tilted her head, intrigued. Yes, I am. And you are?" "Patricia Morgan," the woman replied, approaching. "I'm Alexander's mother." Sarah's heart jumped. Alexander had only briefly mentioned his mother, describing her as an elegant and somewhat reserved woman. He had never talked about introducing them. "Mrs. Morgan," Sarah said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Patricia lightly shook her hand. "The pleasure is mine, dear. I hope you don't mind my surprise visit. I thought it was time to meet the woman who has occupied so much of my son's thoughts." There was something in Patricia's tone that left Sarah uneasy. It was polite, but with an underlying coldness that didn't go unnoticed. "Of course I don't mind," Sarah replied, keeping a smile on her face. "Would you like some tea? I have a small area in the back where we can talk." "That would be lovely," Patricia agreed. While preparing the tea, Sarah felt Patricia's evaluating gaze upon her. When they finally sat down, the tension was palpable. "So, Sarah," Patricia began, her voice soft but penetrating, "tell me about yourself. How did you meet my son?" Sarah briefly recounted the encounter in the rain and how their relationship had developed. Patricia listened in silence, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. "Fascinating," said Patricia when Sarah finished. "I must admit I was quite surprised when I learned of Alexander's involvement with someone like you." The condescending tone didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "Someone like me?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. "Oh, you know," Patricia continued, with a slight wave of her hand. "Someone so different from his world, a florist, and, well, blind?" Sarah completed, feeling a wave of discomfort. "Exactly," Patricia confirmed without hesitation. "You must understand, Sarah, that Alexander has responsibilities, expectations to meet. Our world, well, it's complicated." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "With all due respect, Mrs. Morgan, I believe Alexander is perfectly capable of making his own decisions." Patricia sighed. "Of course he is, dear. But sometimes we need to protect those we love from impulsive choices." The rest of the conversation passed like a blur for Sarah. When Patricia finally left, leaving behind the aroma of an expensive perfume and unspoken words, Sarah felt exhausted and confused. That night, during her usual call with Alexander, Sarah hesitated. Should she tell him about his mother's visit? Part of her wanted to share everything, seek comfort in him. But another part feared creating problems between Alexander and his family. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" Alexander asked, noticing her hesitation. "You seem distant today." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile into her voice. Just tired. How are things in New York? As Alexander talked about his meetings, Sarah wondered what the future held for them. Patricia's words echoed in her mind, planting seeds of doubt that she struggled to ignore. What had begun as a fairy tale was now facing its first real test. Sarah knew their love was strong, but was it strong enough to overcome society's expectations and family pressures? Only time would tell. The days following Patricia's visit were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. Each time the shop's doorbell rang, her heart jumped, torn between hope that it was Alexander returning early and fear that it might be his mother again. Meanwhile, in New York, Alexander was fighting his own battles. The negotiations with the investors were proving more difficult than expected, and he found himself constantly distracted, his thoughts returning to Sarah and home. On a particularly stressful night, after a tense meeting, Alexander called Sarah. "Hi," she answered, her voice a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Sarah," he sighed, feeling part of his tension dissipate just from hearing her voice. "How are you?" There was a pause before she answered. "I'm fine, and you? How are things there?" Alexander hesitated. There was something in Sarah's voice, a subtle tension he couldn't completely decipher. "Things are complicated, but I don't want to talk about that now." "Sarah, is something happening? You sound different." Sarah bit her lip, internally debating whether to tell him about Patricia's visit. Finally, she decided that honesty was the best path. "Alexander, your mother came to visit me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "My mother?" Alexander finally managed to say, his voice a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "What did she say?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering. She made it clear that she doesn't approve of our relationship, said that you have responsibilities, expectations to meet, that I am too different from your world." Alexander felt a wave of anger and frustration. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't know she would do that. What she said doesn't matter. Understand? What we have is between us two, no one else." "I know," Sarah replied softly. "But Alexander, she isn't completely wrong, is she? We are from very different worlds. Sometimes I wonder if—" "No," Alexander firmly interrupted her. "Don't finish that thought. Sarah, what we have is real. It's more real than any business, any social expectation. You've taught me to see the world in a way I never imagined possible. I won't give up on this, on us, for anything." Alexander's words warmed Sarah's heart, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. "I love you, Alexander," she said, her voice choked, "but I'm afraid of not being enough, of making you choose between me and your family, your world." "Sarah, listen to me," Alexander spoke, his voice full of emotion. "You are more than enough. You are everything. And if I have to choose, I choose you. Always you." At that moment, even separated by thousands of miles, both felt the strength of their bond. It was as if their souls were connected by invisible threads, stronger than any physical distance or social barrier. The following days were a test of endurance for both. Sarah immersed herself in work, creating increasingly complex and bold arrangements, channeling her emotions through the flowers. Alexander, in turn, attacked the negotiations with renewed determination, eager to resolve everything, and return home to Sarah. A week later, Alexander finally managed to close the deal with the investors. Exhausted but victorious, he called Sarah as soon as he left the last meeting. "It's done," he announced, barely able to contain his excitement. "I'm coming back tomorrow." Sarah felt a wave of relief and joy. "I can't wait to see you," she replied, her voice full of emotion. The next morning, as Alexander boarded his flight back to Chicago, Sarah tentar novamente Claude atingiu o limite, máximo de caracteres para uma mensagem, e pausou sua resposta. Você pode escrever: "Continuar para prosseguir com o chat.f continue editar prepared." A special surprise at the flower shop. She had created a unique arrangement, combining Alexander's favorite flowers with some rare species she had been cultivating. especially for him. When the doorbell finally announced Alexander's arrival, Sarah felt her heart race. She heard his familiar footsteps approaching quickly, and before she could say anything, felt herself wrapped in a tight embrace. "Sarah," Alexander murmured against her hair, "I missed you so much." They stayed like that for a long moment, just absorbing each other's presence. When they finally separated, Sarah guided Alexander to the arrangement she had prepared. "This is for you," she said softly, placing his hands on the flowers. "Each flower here has a special meaning. Together they tell our story." Alexander touched the flowers delicately, remembering all the lessons Sarah had given him about feeling with more than just his eyes. "It's beautiful," he whispered, moved. "Just like you." In that moment, looking at Sarah among the flowers she had so carefully arranged, Alexander made a decision. No matter what his mother thought, no matter society's expectations or the challenges they might face, what he and Sarah had was too precious to be sacrificed. "Sarah," he said, holding her hands, "I want you to know that I'm committed to this. To us, no matter what happens, we'll be together. Like the flowers you cultivate, our love has deep roots. It can face strong winds, but it won't be uprooted." Sarah smiled, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Together," she repeated, squeezing his hands. As they kissed, surrounded by the perfume of flowers and the promise of a shared future, both knew that no matter what challenges fate had in store for them, they would face everything side by side. Their love, like the most resilient of plants, would find a way to flourish even in the most unlikely terrain. The months following Alexander's return were a period of adjustments and growth for the couple. Their love had been tested by distance and family disapproval, but had emerged stronger. However, new challenges were about to arise, challenges that would test not only their relationship, but also their individual convictions. On a Saturday morning, Alexander arrived at the Garden of Dreams with a thoughtful expression. Sarah, sensing his arrival, immediately noticed the change in his mood. "Good morning, love," she greeted him, approaching for a kiss. "Is something wrong?" Alexander sighed, embracing her. "Not exactly wrong, but complicated. Can I tell you something?" "Of course," Sarah replied, guiding him to the back of the shop where they had more privacy. Once settled, Alexander began, "Remember that big urban development project my company is planning?" Sarah nodded. Alexander had mentioned the project a few times, talking about how it would transform a degraded area of the city into a new commercial and residential center. "Well," he continued, "we discovered that to complete the project, we would need to demolish an old community garden. It's the only green space in that area, and apparently it has been maintained by local residents for decades." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing the information. "And what do you think about this?" she finally asked. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah knew indicated his frustration. "Honestly, I don't know. Before meeting you, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. I would say it's the price of progress. But now you see the value of these green spaces," Sarah completed softly. "Exactly," Alexander confirmed. "But it's not just that. I think about all the people who have cared for that garden, the stories it must hold. And I wonder if I have the right to take that away from them." Sarah extended her hand, finding Alexander's and squeezing it gently. "What do your partners say?" "They don't understand my hesitation," Alexander replied, frustration evident in his voice. "For them, it's just a piece of land that's in the way of progress." Sarah reflected for a moment before speaking. "You know, Alexander, plants have a lot to teach us about adaptation and resilience. Perhaps there's a way to integrate the garden into your project instead of destroying it." Alexander was silent, considering Sarah's words. Then, as if a light had turned on in his mind, he exclaimed, What if we incorporated the garden into the project? We could expand it, make it the green heart of the new development." Sarah smiled, feeling the enthusiasm in Alexander's voice. "That sounds wonderful, and I'm sure the local residents would appreciate seeing their special space not only preserved, but valued." In the days that followed, Alexander immersed himself in a complete revision of the project. He visited the community garden, talked with the residents and listened to their stories. Each conversation, each flower and tree he saw, made him think of Sarah and how she had changed his perspective on the world. However, not everything was roses. When Alexander presented the new proposal to his partners, he was met with skepticism and resistance. "This will significantly increase costs," argued one of them. "And reduce our profit margin," added another. Alexander took a deep breath before responding, "Yes, initially we'll have higher costs and lower profits. But think about the long term. A development that preserves and values the environment and the local community will be much more valuable and sustainable." The discussions were heated and extended for days. Alexander found himself fighting not just for the garden, but for a new vision of business, one that balanced profit and social responsibility. At home, Sarah was his safe harbor. She listened to him patiently every night, offering words of encouragement and wisdom. "Remember," she would say, "even the strongest of trees started as a small seed. You're planting something important here, Alexander." Finally, after weeks of negotiations and revisions, the new project was approved. The community garden would not only be preserved, but expanded and integrated into the development as a central park, with areas for community cultivation and environmental education. When Alexander gave Sarah the news, she hugged him tightly, tears of pride in her eyes. "You did something incredible," she whispered. "We did," Alexander corrected. "Without you, without everything you taught me, I would never have seen the value in that garden." That night, as they walked hand in hand through the Garden of Dreams, after closing, Alexander realized how much he had changed. The man who once only cared about profits and power now saw beauty and value in preserving a simple community garden. "Sarah," he said, stopping and turning to her, "thank you for teaching me to see the world differently. You haven't just changed my vision of plants and nature, but of life, business, everything." Sarah smiled, gently touching Alexander's face. "And you, my love, taught me that it's possible to make a difference, even in the business world, that we can use our power and influence for something greater than ourselves." As they kissed, surrounded by the perfume of night flowers, both knew they were on the right path. Together, they were not only cultivating their love, but also planting seeds of change that would flourish far beyond their lives. The Garden of Dreams had become more than a simple flower shop. It was the symbol of a transformation, a constant reminder that with love and determination, it's possible to create beauty and meaning even in the most unlikely places. The success of the community garden project brought a new dimension to Alexander and Sarah's life. While Alexander was acclaimed in business circles as a visionary in sustainability and social responsibility, Sarah found herself increasingly involved in community urban gardening projects. The Garden of Dreams had become a reference point for green initiatives in the city. However, with visibility also came scrutiny. On a sunny spring morning, Sarah was preparing the store to open when she heard the doorbell. It was too early to be a customer. "Hello?" she called, turning toward the sound. "Miss Sarah?" a male voice responded. "I'm Jason Brooks, from the City newspaper. I'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with Alexander Morgan." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. She and Alexander had kept their relationship away from the spotlight until then. "I'm sorry, but I don't give personal interviews," she replied, trying to keep her voice firm. "I understand," Jason persisted, "but the public is interested in knowing more about the woman who apparently transformed one of the city's most ruthless businessmen into an environmental advocate. There are rumors that you're using your influence to manipulate corporate decisions." Sarah felt her blood boil. "That's absurd. Please leave." After the journalist's departure, Sarah immediately called Alexander, who was furious about the intrusion. "Don't worry, love," he assured her. "I'll take care of this." In the days that followed, the couple found themselves at the center of a media storm. Speculative articles emerged, questioning the nature of their relationship and Sarah's influence on Alexander's business. Some portrayed her as a manipulator, others as an environmental saint. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle. The stress began to affect both of them. Alexander spent hours on the phone with his lawyers and press advisors, trying to control the damage. Sarah, in turn, found herself hesitant to leave the shop, fearing being approached by reporters. One night, after a particularly difficult day, they met at Alexander's apartment. Sarah was quiet, distractedly fiddling with a vase of orchids on the coffee table. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked softly, sitting beside her. Sarah sighed. "I'm thinking about how everything got so complicated. Sometimes I wonder if I'm causing more problems than helping." Alexander took her hands, squeezing them gently. "Sarah, look at me." She raised her face toward him. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Don't let these idiotic speculations make you doubt that. But your reputation, your business—" "My reputation," Alexander laughed humorlessly. "Before you, I was known as a heartless shark. Now, I'm seen as someone who cares about something beyond profit. That's thanks to you." Sarah smiled weakly. "Still, all this attention, and it's not what I wanted." Alexander was silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then, as if he had made a decision, he spoke. "What if we gave them something to talk about?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "Marry me," Alexander said, his voice full of emotion. "Not because of the press or what people think, but because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Sarah was speechless, tears springing to her eyes. "Alexander, You don't need to answer now," he continued. "I know it's sudden and with all this craziness happening, but I want you to know that's how I feel. You taught me to see beauty where I only saw numbers. You taught me the value of caring, of nurturing. I want to build a life with you, Sarah, a life full of flowers and growth, of challenges and joys." Sarah extended her hand, touching Alexander's face. She felt the stubble, the tension in his jaw, but also the warmth of his skin, the softness of his gaze. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They embraced, tears mixing with laughter of joy. For a moment, the world out there, with its sensationalist headlines and malicious rumors, ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, and the promise of a future together in sea. The days that followed, the announcement of their engagement caught the media by surprise. Speculation gave way to romantic stories about the businessman transformed by the love of a blind florist. The Garden of Dreams was flooded with flowers and congratulation cards. As they planned their wedding, Alexander and Sarah decided to use the attention they were receiving for something positive. They announced that, instead of gifts, they would like guests to make donations to community gardening projects in underprivileged areas of the city. The idea caught fire. Soon, companies and public figures were competing to see who could create the most impressive community garden. What had begun as a tabloid scandal had transformed into an urban revitalization movement. One afternoon, while working together at the Garden of Dreams, preparing arrangements for one of these new community initiatives, Sarah paused, a smile playing on her lips. "What is it?" Alexander asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking," she replied, "about how the most beautiful things can be born from the greatest challenges, like flowers that bloom through concrete." Alexander smiled, pulling her close. "Just like our love," he murmured, kissing her softly. And there, surrounded by the perfume of flowers and the buzzing of bees, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Like a well-tended garden, their love would continue to grow, flourish, and inspire others to see the beauty around them. Alexander and Sarah's wedding day dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze, as if nature itself was celebrating the union. The chosen location couldn't have been more significant. The community garden that Alexander had saved and expanded, now a lush green oasis in the heart of the city. Sarah woke up early, her fingers delicately tracing the contours of the wedding dress hanging near the bed. It was a simple but elegant model, adorned with small fabric flowers that she herself had helped create. "Nervous?" asked Jenny, her assistant and friend, who would help her prepare. "A little," Sarah admitted with a smile. "More anxious, actually. Anxious to begin this new chapter." Meanwhile, in his apartment, Alexander adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his reflection in the mirror revealing a mixture of nervousness and happiness. His friend and partner, Michael, watched with an amused smile. "Who would have thought," commented Michael, "that the feared Alexander Morgan would be so nervous because of a wedding?" Alexander laughed, relaxing a bit. "If someone had told me a year ago that I would be here today, about to get married in a community garden, I would have thought they were crazy." "Sarah really changed you," observed Michael. "She showed me a better version of myself," Alexander corrected, his gaze softening as he thought of his bride. The garden was magnificently decorated. Elaborate floral arrangements, personally created by Sarah, adorned every corner. The path leading to the altar was lined with a mixture of wildflowers and cultivated ones, symbolizing the union between the natural world and the one built by man. When Sarah arrived, guided by her father, a murmur of admiration ran through the audience. Her dress, with its delicate fabric flowers, seemed to float around her. But what really caught everyone's attention was the radiant smile on her face, an expression of pure happiness. Alexander, seeing her, felt his heart race. At that moment, all the doubts, all the challenges they had faced, seemed to vanish. There was only Sarah walking toward him, bringing with her the promise of a future full of love and growth. The ceremony was touching and personal. In her vows, Sarah spoke about how Alexander had become her eyes to the business world, while she had become his eyes to the beauty of nature. Alexander, in turn, promised to be Sarah's support, just as she was his, cultivating their love like the most precious of gardens. After exchanging rings and the kiss that sealed their union, the couple turned to the audience. It was then that Alexander made a surprise announcement. "Sarah and I want to share our happiness in a special way," he began. "We've decided to create a foundation dedicated to the creation and maintenance of community gardens in underprivileged areas of the city. We believe that everyone deserves to have a piece of nature close to home, a place to cultivate not only plants, but also hope and community." The news was received with enthusiastic applause. Sarah, moved, squeezed Alexander's hand, feeling love and pride overflow in her chest. The reception that followed was a celebration not only of Alexander and Sarah's love, but also of the transformation that this love had triggered in the city. Representatives from communities benefited by the urban gardening projects came to thank them and share stories of how their lives had changed. Among the guests, Patricia, Alexander's mother, observed everything with a mixture of emotions. Approaching the couple, she took Sarah's hands in hers. "My dear," said Patricia, her voice choked, "I was wrong about you. You not only made my son happy, but you made him a better man. Thank you for bringing so much beauty to our lives." Sarah, surprised and moved, hugged her mother-in-law. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she responded softly. As the night progressed, Alexander and Sarah danced under the stars, surrounded by the perfume of flowers and the soft sound of laughter and conversations. It was as if the entire garden was celebrating with them, each flower a silent testimony to the transformative power of love. "So, Mrs. Morgan," Alexander murmured in Sarah's ear as they danced. "Happy?" "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you, Mr. Honorary Florist?" Alexander laughed softly. "Complete. You've given me a new purpose, Sarah, a new garden to cultivate." As the couple continued their dance under the loving gaze of friends and family, it was clear to all present that this wasn't just the happy ending of a love story. It was the beginning of something greater, a planted seed that promised to bloom in countless lives. The Garden of Dreams, which had begun as a small flower shop, was now metaphorically expanding throughout the city. Alexander and Sarah, united not only by love but by a shared vision of a greener and more compassionate world, were ready to face any challenge the future might bring. And so, as the moon rose in the night sky, illuminating the garden with its silver light, a new story began to be written. A story of love, growth, and the incredible capacity of people to flourish in unexpected circumstances, just like the most beautiful flowers that sometimes bloom in the cracks of concrete. The years following Alexander and Sarah's wedding were marked by growth, challenges, and a series of transformations, both personal and in the community around them. The Tomorrow's Gardens Foundation, created by them on their wedding day, quickly became a driving force in the revitalization of urban areas throughout the country. On an autumn morning, 5 years after the wedding, Sarah was at the Garden of Dreams, now expanded and transformed into an environmental education center, as well as a flower shop. Her skilled fingers were working on a complex arrangement when she heard Alexander's familiar footsteps approaching. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing her softly. "How are my two treasures today?" Sarah smiled, resting her hand on her slightly rounded belly. "We're great. Your son or daughter seems to have inherited your taste for constant movement." The news of Sarah's pregnancy, 4 months ago, had been received with joy not only by them, but by the entire community they had built around them. The Garden of Dreams and the Foundation had become an extended family for many. "I have news," Alexander said, excitement evident in his voice. "The project for the new sensory park has been approved. We can start construction next month." Sarah hugged her husband, moved. The sensory park was a dream she had cherished for years. A green space designed specifically for people with disabilities, where all senses would be stimulated and celebrated. "That's wonderful, Alexander. I can't wait to start planning the aromatic gardens and tactile areas." As they discussed the details of the project, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Wilson, a 70-year-old lady who had become a constant presence at the Garden of Dreams since the community garden in her neighborhood had been revitalized by the foundation. "Good morning, my dears," she greeted them warmly. "I came to get some seedlings for our community garden. And also," she added with a mischievous smile, "to see how our most famous mom-to-be is doing." Sarah laughed, allowing Mrs. Wilson to touch her belly. "We're fine, Mrs. Wilson. And how's the garden?" "Oh, it's a beauty. Those permaculture techniques you taught us have worked wonders. We're harvesting more than we can eat." As Alexander helped Mrs. Wilson select the seedlings, Sarah reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as a casual encounter in the rain had transformed into a movement that was changing lives. Later that day, during a foundation meeting, Alexander presented a new proposal: expand the therapeutic gardening program to hospitals across the country. "We've seen the impact our gardens have had at the local hospital," he argued. "Patients recovering faster, stress levels reduced among the medical staff. Imagine the good we could do on a national scale." The proposal was received with enthusiasm, and soon plans were being drawn up. Sarah, listening to the discussions, felt a wave of pride. Alexander had come so far from his days as a ruthless businessman. That night at home, the couple relaxed on their porch, surrounded by plants and the soft sound of a small fountain. Sarah leaned against Alexander, their hands intertwined over her belly. "Did you ever imagine," she said softly, "that one day we would be here? That encounter in the rain would lead us to all this?" Alexander kissed the top of her head. "Honestly? Dosia, you changed my life in ways I could never have predicted. You made me see an entire world I was ignoring." "We changed each other," Sarah gently corrected. "You gave me the courage to dream bigger, to believe we could make a real difference in the world." They were silent for a moment, absorbing the peace of the night and each other's company. Then Sarah let out a small exclamation of surprise. "What is it?" Alexander asked, concerned. "The baby," Sarah replied with a smile. Or she just kicked, "Here, feel." Alexander placed his hand where Sarah indicated, his eyes widening as he felt the movement. "It's amazing," he whispered. "Another little miracle we're cultivating together." In that moment, surrounded by the garden they had created together, with a new life growing between them, Alexander and Sarah felt a deep gratitude. Every challenge they had faced, every obstacle overcome had led them to this point. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "our child will grow up in a better world because of what we did. A world with more green, more compassion. And we'll teach them to see beauty in everything," Alexander added, "just as you taught me." As the night progressed, the couple remained on the porch, making plans for the future, dreaming of the new gardens they would plant, both literally and metaphorically. They knew the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they were ready to face any challenge side by side. The Garden of Dreams had become more than a name. It was a reality they lived every day, cultivating love, compassion, and hope, not just for themselves, but for an entire community. And now, with a new member on the way, their family was about to bloom in even more beautiful and unexpected ways. Summer arrived, bringing with it not only intense heat, but also the expectation for the birth of Alexander and Sarah's baby. The Garden of Dreams was more vibrant than ever, as if nature itself was eager for the arrival of the new life. On a particularly hot afternoon, Sarah was in the educational space of the flower shop, conducting a class on floral arrangements for a group of children. Her hands gently guided the small hands of the students, teaching them to feel the different textures and shapes of the flowers. "Remember," she said with a smile, "each flower has its own story to tell. When you create an arrangement, you're bringing these stories together to form something new and beautiful." Alexander, who had arrived early from a meeting, observed the scene from the door, his heart overflowing with love and admiration. Seeing Sarah with her 8-month belly surrounded by eager children and colorful flowers was an image he knew he would treasure forever. Suddenly, Sarah stopped, taking a hand to her belly. Alexander immediately ran to her. "Sarah, is everything okay?" She smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "It's more than okay. I think our little gardener is ready to meet the world." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of emotion. The news of Sarah's labor spread quickly, and soon the Garden of Dreams was full of friends and community members, all anxious for news. At the hospital, surrounded by the aroma of the flowers that Alexander had insisted on bringing, to the room Sarah gave birth to a girl. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, she cried with joy. "She's perfect," whispered Sarah, her fingers delicately tracing the face of her daughter. Alexander, with tears in his eyes, kissed Sarah's forehead and then his daughter's. "She is," he agreed, his voice choked with emotion. "Our little Lily." The name had been chosen months before, a tribute to the passion that had united them and transformed their lives. In the days that followed, the hospital room became an extension of the Garden of Dreams. Friends, family, and even customers passed by to welcome little Lily, bringing with them not only gifts but stories and good energy. Mrs. Wilson was one of the first visitors, bringing a small pot with a jasmine seedling. "So the room always has a sweet smell," she explained, placing the pot on the windowsill. Patricia, Alexander's mother, surprised everyone with her emotion when holding her granddaughter for the first time. "She has Alexander's eyes," she commented, marveled, "but the smile is all yours, Sarah." When the day finally came to take Lily home, Alexander and Sarah were greeted by a true celebration at the Garden of Dreams. The community had gathered to welcome the newest member of their extended family. An arch of flowers marked the entrance to the shop, and in the center of the garden, a small fruit tree had been planted in honor of Lily. "So she can grow along with the tree," explained one of the community gardeners. In the months that followed, Lily became a constant presence at the Garden of Dreams. Sarah carried her in a sling while working, narrating each activity, describing the colors and aromas of the flowers. Alexander, in turn, spent hours showing Lily the different plants in the garden, marveled at the curiosity in his daughter's eyes. A year passed in the blink of an eye. At Lily's first birthday party, held in the community garden that had been the stage for her parents' wedding, Alexander and Sarah had a moment of reflection. "It's amazing," said Alexander, watching Lily play with other children among the flower beds. 6 years ago, I didn't even know this place existed. Now I can't imagine our life without it." Sarah smiled, squeezing her husband's hand. "It's like I always say, the seeds of love, when well cultivated, can transform the entire world." At that moment, seeing their daughter grow amidst so much beauty and goodness, surrounded by a community they had helped to flourish, Alexander and Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The Garden of Dreams had become much more than a flower shop or even a foundation. It was a living testimony to the transformative power of love, compassion, and connection with nature. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Lily ran to her parents, a small wildflower in her hand. "For you, Mommy," she said, extending the flower to Sarah. Sarah took the flower, feeling its delicate texture. "It's beautiful, my love. What flower is this?" Alexander crouched to his daughter's level, smiling. "It's a daisy, Lily. Remember what it symbolizes?" Lily thought for a moment, then answered with a radiant smile. "Innocence and new beginning." Sarah laughed, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "That's right, my love. Each day is a new beginning, a new chance to make the world a little more beautiful." As the family embraced, under the starry sky and surrounded by the perfume of flowers, it was clear that the Garden of Dreams would continue to grow and flourish, not only in size but in impact and meaning. It was a legacy of love, hope, and renewal that Alexander and Sarah were proud to pass on to Lily and to future generations. And so, with the closing of this chapter, a new story began. A story of a family, a community, and a garden, all growing together, facing challenges, celebrating victories, and above all, spreading beauty and compassion wherever they went. Dear listeners, we hope that Alexander and Sarah's journey has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours. To continue exploring equally captivating and moving stories, we've prepared a special playlist with tales that celebrate love, overcoming challenges, and the beauty of life. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Each day we bring new narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We would love to hear your opinions and reflections on Alexander and Sarah's story. How did this narrative touch you? What moments moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, just as in the Garden of Dreams, each of us has the power to plant seeds of change and love in our lives and in the lives of those around us. May this story inspire you to cultivate your own garden of dreams, whatever it may be. Until the next story, and don't forget, in every challenge there is an opportunity for growth. In every encounter, the chance for a new transformation. Keep blooming, friends.